Can you hear it, people? Can you smell it? You can almost taste it. NHL puck drop on the 2022-23 season is officially 60 days away, and that means it's time for the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Friday edition with Steele and Flip. Lots to get into on today's episode, people. Thank you for being here. Let's tap in.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? And welcome back to your show. It is the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Steele and Flip, Friday edition. Lots of news, a buzz around the NHL as usual, with the NHL season only 60 days away from puck drop on a brand new season. Steele and I are foaming at the mouth with fantasy expectation and news. So make sure you tune in and subscribe every single day. August is tuned down a little bit, but September is right around the corner, and we will be back to 5 episodes a week. And thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode, guys, we're going to be taking a look at the top line combinations, fantasy-wise, in the NHL, the top trios that really do change the fantasy landscape. It's also time to take a look at 2 major injuries coming out of the NHL over the last 48 hours. Max Pacioretty, torn Achilles, done for 6 months. Robin Lehner, another injury, expected to miss the entire season, upcoming with a hip injury. Steele, let's start with the injuries and what they mean for fantasy impact, because there's going to be some opportunities for some players that fantasy GMs need to have their eye on. So hit me with what you think about these 2 injuries to 2 players that are getting up there in age, but still are very relevant to their team's success, especially Robin Lehner, a number 1 goalie.
Yeah, I first want to mention, this is why you don't do fantasy drafts in June or July, because you don't know what's going to happen after free agency, people that might get injured in preseason. So I feel bad for the guys who drafted Pacioretty and Robin Lehner in the league that I'm in when we drafted back in June. So yeah. I feel bad for them.
More so Lehner, for sure.
Yeah, more so Lehner for sure. But it's definitely some tough news for their fantasy league. But I'll start off with Max Pacioretty because I feel like that's the lesser of the news, and I think we can dig a little bit more into Robin Lehner. But Max Pacioretty, it's definitely a tough hit for the Carolina Hurricanes after they traded future considerations to the Vegas Golden Knights. But it definitely is a tough hit with a guy who's been in the league for so long and has been productive in the offensive zone. You know, they traded for him for a reason, so they can get some leadership qualities and lead their young guys who didn't really show up in the playoff and who need that playoff experience, and Max Pacioretty brings that to the team. So without him for the first 6 months, and we know how hard it is to come back from an Achilles injury or just an injury in general after having surgery and being out for so long. So it's going to be very, very concerning to see how he comes back from this injury and the surgery after this season.
Most definitely. And hey, the Carolina Hurricanes here, they added Max Pacioretty hoping that they would bolster the offense that kind of ran dry on them in the Rangers series. We know that this team, not many better when it comes to the defensive side of things, Steele. So Pacioretty, you mentioned his injury history as well. He is a veteran player. This is a concerning injury. A torn Achilles is just so hard to recover from. Yeah. And I think the impact here really just goes to show you that there's going to be some more minutes sprinkled around that top 6 in Carolina. And I think really this isn't a takeaway from the value of those forwards, Steele. I would say it actually increases their value because of the increased opportunity that some of those, you know, the Teuvo Teravainen and Svechnikovs of the world that would have been eaten into their minutes by Pacioretty being around. I can still see these are still very valuable fantasy assets on a good top 6 in Carolina. But you mentioned it, still an injury that can overall harm the success of this team. I don't know if it really is a hindrance on the fantasy value of some of those players around, because like I said, that increased opportunity in the top 6, I think that it still makes them very valuable. But I think, like you also said again, and thank you for teeing this up so nicely, Robin Lehner is the injury news to focus on. Apologize for getting ahead of ourselves, unless you have more Max Pacioretty takes here.
No. Robin Lehner is the story I think we need to dive into.
I appreciate that, because also very quickly, you mentioned right before we started LTIR. We know that the Vegas Golden Knights were very much up against the cap, trying to dump salary, really handcuffed by some of those moves. Quick tweet lookup, Cap Friendly, shouts to Cap Friendly. With both Lehner and Shea Weber LTIR eligible, Steele, the Vegas Golden Knights can exceed the upper cap limit by $12.8 million this next season, giving them plenty of dollars to work with. So now all of a sudden, I would keep your eyes on the Vegas Golden Knights as a team that might be active over the next couple of weeks, trying to fill some holes here. But also, more importantly, Robin Lehner's hip injury opens the door for two backup goalies in Thompson and Laurent Boissat, thank you.
Laurent Brossoit.
There, hey, you know me with the names, but I think that's where we can start this conversation, Steele. These two goalies now immediately become valuable targets.
I don't think they're valuable, though.
Okay,
I don't think they're valuable whatsoever, because I'm looking at both these goalies, and Laurent Brossoit has been a backup goaltender his entire career.
Yes.
29 years old. He played for the Winnipeg Jets. He comes over to the Vegas Golden Knights. At most, I believe he's played 25, 30 games a season, and he doesn't even put up that great of a record. You know, he's had a couple of winning seasons. His save percentage, I believe, is .905, so nothing special about that. He is above 900, which is obviously great to see, but Laurent Brossoit has been a backup goaltender his entire career, and Logan Thompson has only played 20 games in the NHL. He's 25 years old. Again, a very young guy. I believe you've mentioned this before. There's not much to love about the Vegas Golden Knights bottom six forwards. There is a lot to love about their defensive core, but with these two guys in net, and obviously with you just mentioning the $12+ million that they're going to have in cap space to kind of make some moves, I think they have to go out and get a veteran goaltender who can back up one of these guys. I don't think you can rely on these two guys to be in the crease the entire season. So I think this upcoming season, or in at least very soon, the Vegas Golden Knights should go out and get a goaltender, maybe even trade for a goaltender. But there are some goaltenders on the market still. Go out and get a veteran goaltender who you can rely on just for this year until Lehner can come back from the surgery, and then as well make some adjustments to the bottom six forward group, because I don't like what they have. I don't like what they have up front in their bottom six right now.
Yeah, and I'll say this about my statement before about saying that they become two valuable fantasy options. Deeper formats for sure, but I will make this argument. The Vegas Golden Knights missed out on the playoffs by a very slim margin. That was without Mark Stone. That was with a Jack Eichel recovering still and getting comfortable. Jonathan Marchessault had some injuries as well. Look, Riley Smith, Jonathan Marchessault, Mark Stone, Jack Eichel. There's enough up there along with a solid blue line that if they play much better, and I think they will alongside a healthy Mark Stone, book out on that, because we know he has been dealing with serious injuries, but it sounds like he is going to be ready to go. I would say that there could be some wiggle room upside on a couple of those goalies. Again, though, like you said, be wary of how high you're going to draft these guys, because they might even be guys you pass on originally and look to fill a hole down the stretch. Might be a nice little pickup for these Vegas Golden Knights goaltenders. But I'll say this too, Steele, is we know how thin the goaltending position can be. You're going to have to get lucky at some point in the regular season with your goaltending. And, 10-9-3 for Boissat isn't terrible, but I hear you. Two backup goalies perennially. We'll see what happens, because I think Vegas is going to be better. You predicted Eichel being better. If Eichel can make that step forward, I should say, maybe the Vegas Golden Knights and both Boissat and Thompson are people to look at, a website to look at. BetOnline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at your number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. Shout out to the St. Jude Classic. BetOnline.net continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering info, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, and more. They have you covered. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day and thank you so much for subscribing and following the podcast. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And Flip, let's get right into it. The top lines in the NHL, the top trios. There's obviously some great lines out there, some great players who have some great chemistry together. I think for the most part, there are some obvious top lines in the NHL, which
you and I are going to cross over here on a few of these.
We're going to cross over for a few. Yeah, we're definitely going to cross over for a few of them. I tried my hardest not to take those top lines, like Connor McDavid, Draisaitl, Evander Kane, Nathan McKinnon. I tried my hardest not to. So I did find some backups, some guys who are in the top 10, in my opinion, maybe even top 5, but I didn't want to state the obvious of Connor McDavid and guys
appreciate
like
that.
McKinnon.
I appreciate that preamble, and I think we should add to it with the fact that today's NHL, this is a fluid situation.
Yes.
Lines are juggled all the time, but some of these lines that we're going to mention, they do stay together, and they will definitely be factors, and this is what I wanted to bring up before we get into these lines, is they will also be factors for the D-men on these teams from a fantasy side of things. So when we're mentioning the trio of forwards on this team, double circle the D-men playing the PP1, PP2 minutes, because they're going to get a ton of apples. They're going to get a ton of peripheral goals and points just from being in the mix with these lines. So very first of all, I am going to close my tab on the Colorado Avalanche. I'm going to close my tab on the Edmonton Oilers, because those were my first two teams. And I'm glad you mentioned some other ones. And why don't we start with one that I know you're going to like, with Ryan Hartman, Mats Zuccarello, and our boy Kirill Killer Bill Kaprizov. Because we know, Steele, this team runs through this top line. And you used a quote, and it's stuck in my head because it's so true. Right off the bat of us doing this show. By the way, head out and subscribe, like, follow, share, all of that. Steele and I are on a heater right now, and the fire pre-draft content is about to drop, so stay tuned. Anyway, you said Mats Zuccarello can find Kirill Kaprizov in the parking lot with his eyes closed with a tape-to-tape pass. Maybe I'm not quoting you word for word, but the point is the chemistry between these three players, very balanced attack, and I'll say they might even be in the top 5, in my opinion, for just the kind of chemistry and fantasy production that these three players put up together, Steele.
I love that you bring them up, so I don't even have to talk about them. They are one of my favorite lines in the NHL right now, and obviously one of my favorite players, Kirill Kaprizov, leading the way for the Minnesota Wild. I can't wait to see what Minnesota does this year. I'm so excited for their season ahead. But my first line that I want to talk about, and it's actually one of maybe Minnesota's rival, and that's the St. Louis Blues top line of Vladimir Tarasenko, Robert Thomas, and Pavel Buchnevich. Those guys, all three of them, just had a career year this past season, especially for Tarasenko coming off that shoulder surgery and has dealt with injuries the past 2 years. I love this line. I've been so high on Robert Thomas. I think he's one of the best young players in the league right now. Tarasenko, 82 points, Thomas, 77 points, and Buchnevich, 76 points. So these guys are putting a ton of points up offensively. Great production from them. And I think they only continue to get better and better this upcoming season. So for me, that is one of the top lines to keep your eye on for, as well as on the blue line with Torrey Krug, who I really, really love.
Torrey Krug is a guy that I acquired last year as a secondary piece in a fantasy trade in my dynasty league that I absolutely needed in that trade. And I think he's in line. There's another bounce back player. Torrey Krug's going to be involved in a lot of power play minutes. But anyway, I wanted to dig into the numbers on this a little bit, Steele, and thank you for bringing up this group, because Thomas Buchnevich and Tarasenko expected goals per 60 minutes, and I'm not a big, deep analytics guy, but at over 3.5 goals per 60 minutes with this trio on the ice, the St. Louis Blues have found a little bit of gold here with Robert Thomas. Yes. He got paid this offseason, and they have some chemistry. That is for sure. He's also going to be a player, guys, that if you're not in a dedicated fantasy draft circle, a lot of GMs are going to sleep on Robert Thomas, and you can jump on him in a good round, Steele. And I'd like to ask you this very quickly before we move on. Where are you, and this is a tease to the upcoming fantasy content, where are you pegging your boy Robert Thomas, RT, at a draft round scenario if you're doing a mock draft in terms of round?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I would have to assume around, maybe round 6 or 7. It does come into play because he does, again, I've been on this guy about shooting the puck a lot more.
He
needs
has to shoot
the
it
puck more. If he shoots the puck more, this guy has a really underrated shot. So if he shoots the puck more, he can put it in the back of the net. So he doesn't shoot the puck that much. He doesn't hit that much, and he doesn't block shots that much. But he gets a decent amount of goals, 20, 25 goals a season, but it's the assists that really add up. So again, if you're in one of those leagues that have, face-offs, if face-offs play a part into it, but it's really the assists that are huge for Robert Thomas. I would put him in rounds either 6, 7, or 8. That's just off the top of my head. I would have to, obviously do a little bit more research to see where his preseason rank is right now.
It was off the cuff question, and I'm trying to keep you on your toes here, pal.
I'm thinking round 7, mid-draft, one of those areas.
Okay, I like it. And these are the things that, guys, I keep pumping it up, but I'm telling you, this is your source for everything that you're going to need to know heading into draft season, which is right freaking now. We're not dropping any F-bombs, but that's how excited Steele and I are. 60 days, people, till puck drop. I've been spending too much money betting on golf, burning my money on random late night MLB parlays, and it's time to get back in the kitchen and pay these bills. I got a wedding coming up in October, Steele, and it's time to get serious. Why don't you take us to break, and we'll talk about a few more line combos. I might even throw in a bet or two because I'm feeling spicy.
Hey, once again, we have to thank all the listeners, all the fans out there for tuning in for the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, making it your first listen every single day. Make sure you hit the subscribe and the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. Thank you so much. We finally just hit 171 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So keep hitting the subscribe. Let's get all the way up to 200 before the season starts. And hopefully by the end of the year, maybe get up to 300 with all the listeners and the fans tuning in. So thank you so much again. And let's continue on the topic of top lines, top trios in the NHL right now. And I want to kick us off again with another Western Conference team. I have a lot of Western Conference teams for top lines. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, these guys in particular, but I think it's just special what they've been able to accomplish. And that's the Dallas Stars top line, who has been an offensive juggernaut, in my opinion. Especially Joe Pavelski at 38 years old, who led the team in points last year with 81 points on the season. Yeah. And he's centered by Rupe Hintz, who, for me has been a little off and on the last couple of years, but really hit it last season, hit his stride, 72 points last year. And Jason Robertson with 79 points. Huge. I think if they were able to get a little bit more help from their bottom 9 forward groups, I'm saying bottom 9. Because that's what they are right now. It's a bottom 9 and a top 1. So if they can get a little bit more help from them, they might even be able to produce more than what they did last season. But Pavelski at 38 years old, Robertson just coming into the league and dominating for the Dallas Stars, and Rupe Hintz, like I said, catching his stride right now. I think they have one of the best chemistries in the league right now. And like what you said with Kirill Kaprizov, Zuccarello, and Hartman, one of the best chemistries in my opinion.
I agree with you. And there's 2 things where I want to take this Dallas Stars conversation. One is what you brought up. The bottom 9 last year. This team was a one-line crew and at times just a one-man crew with Jason Robertson. And where I wanted to mention very first is Joe Pavelski at 38 years old. Ain't no way he's putting up 81 points again. That's what I'm going to say. That was just an impressive season from a guy who has had a great career. Hall of Famer for sure. But he ain't doing that again. But what he does have the benefit of is probably playing alongside Robertson and Hintz again, 2 guys that are now just really rounding into forms as borderline superstars, at least with Jason Robertson. So I think Joe Pavelski's value and this line's value overall for sure is one of the top 10 in the league. Very much so. Number 2, though, if some of your predictions, Steele, and I mean you personally, are correct with Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn, the addition of Mason Marchment, maybe an improvement from some of their younger players, maybe that bottom 9 can prop up that top line a little bit more, free up a bit more space, and make them an even more effective trio. That could happen. We know that's a possibility Mason Marchment's a good bottom 6er. We'll see what happens there. But what I'm most intrigued to see what happens with new additions, and we've talked about this team a lot, it's the Ottawa Senators. And the top line in Ottawa next year is going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
If Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, and Drake Batherson are paired together on the top line next season, look out, because all three are going to be elite fantasy studs. And I want to hit you with this, Steele, because I read a very interesting article on NHL.com Fantasy yesterday about Brady Tkachuk being a top 5 fantasy player this upcoming season. I want to get your take on that because I tend to believe he's in line with some of the additions around him with the Brinkat and others in Giroux. Tkachuk is about to absolutely go beast mode.
I think top 5's a little bold. I would actually consider putting him in the top 10 based alone, and I'm saying alone, off of his hitting ability. This guy puts up over 300 hits in a season pretty much. And then you factor in the goals, the assists, the penalty minutes, all, the block shots, the shots on net. It keeps adding up. And especially with the new additions, like you mentioned, his production is just going to elevate and keep going up for years and years to come. We just saw Matthew Tkachuk put up 105 points after his career high was 82 a couple of seasons ago. So that is what Brady Tkachuk could do possibly this upcoming season. Maybe not 105, but definitely get up to 80, 90.
I could see triple digits for Brady Tkachuk for sure. And just like he is now around. Also, let's not get it twisted. Improved in the back end as well with a better goaltender in Cam Talbot. That can work wonders for an offense if you don't have to be worried about double backing every other play because you can't rely on Matt Murray to make a save or stay healthy. Holy crow, strap in for a long season, Toronto Maple Leafs fans, because it's about to get wild on this podcast. But anyway, Steele, I'm with you. Top 5 fantasy players. There are too many good ones because right off the bat, Matthews, Draisaitl, McDavid take up the first 3, McKinnon the first 4, and he ain't fitting in the top 5. So that's just a bold take. That just NHL.com. Do better with your clickbait titles. I'm calling you out on that because it worked for me. So there you go. You got one. But Brady Tkachuk could be there in that second group. Could be top 10, top 15. It's going to be a special season, I think, at least for a step forward-wise in Ottawa. Yes. We'll see what happens, though, Steele. Who else are you looking at, though?
I'll mention this one real quick because, again, I didn't want to state the obvious, but I had to mention these 3 guys. But I do have another one in mind. So I'll mention this team real quick, and that's the Tampa Bay Lightning, obviously. Steven Stamkos, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov. When all 3 of those guys are healthy, they are the best line in the league. And there's no question about that in my mind. I believe those 3 together, you could obviously compare them with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Evander Kane this upcoming season, or even McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog. But in my opinion, the season Stamkos just had, and if Point and Kucherov can remain healthy, that's the best line in the league for me. But talking about new additions, and we've talked about this team a lot, but we have to talk about them again right now. And this might be a bold take for some people, but I'm going back to the Calgary Flames top line. Yeah, I'm going back to the Calgary Flames. Jonathan Huberdeau, 115 points this past season. Elias Lindholm, 82 points this past season. And now, who's probably going to be their right winger, Tyler Toffoli, who had 50 points. It is a little bit sad, in comparison to the other guys we just talked about. But when you bring in Jonathan Huberdeau, who is a visionary out on the ice, especially in the offensive zone, Jonathan Huberdeau, I think Elias Lindholm even has a better season this upcoming year. He can maybe even surpass this past season with 85 points, maybe even reach 90 points playing alongside Huberdeau. And with Tyler Toffoli, I think he was in a bad situation with the Montreal Canadiens. He gets traded to the Calgary Flames. And when you get traded, it takes a little while to get your foot under wraps and to get back into the groove of things. He had 50 points and I believe 65 or 70 games. So he didn't play the entire season. He's 30 years old. And I think, again, playing with Jonathan Huberdeau, that opens the door for him on the power play and, just 5-on-5 in general.
And just Jonathan Huberdeau and Elias Lindholm alone, that combination is worth taking a look at. And when it comes to improving the fantasy value with players around them, there's not too many guys better than Jonathan Huberdeau. So that becomes a de facto situation. And I think I mentioned that, yes, Tyler Toffoli does seem to be that guy who's going to slot in there. But I still think whatever guy slots up in that lineup to play with Lindholm and Huberdeau makes it a very good fantasy trio and a very good hockey line, because I would even be fine with seeing Blake Coleman getting a look. I'd be fine with Dylan Dubé getting a look too, if Tyler Toffoli doesn't pan out, because he clearly is the choice to run out there for the very first, I would say, give them at least a couple of months to gel, because he has the most talent out of that three of them, that's for sure. Two more trios I want to mention, Steele. And the first one I'm going to just mention as honorable mention because of the caveat of injuries and age. But over the last 10 to 12 seasons, the Boston Bruins have been one of the most consistent franchises in the NHL when it comes to postseason appearances. And a lot of that has to do with their top line. And I know David Pastrnak hasn't been around for 10 to 12 seasons, and either has Brad Marchand. But for the better part of the last 6 or 7 years, Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, and David Pastrnak have been consistent and have been the constant in Boston. So I wanted to just give that line some love. They're injured. They're getting up there in age. And other than David Pastrnak...
And they're not making the playoffs like you and I both stated.
So there's going to be a regression in Boston. But I wanted to give them that love because I can hear Boston fans in the back of my ear, and they're not wrong about the quality of that, but they're not in the top 10 anymore. A line that will be, and one that still has a guy named Sidney Crosby anchoring up the middle. Jake Guentzel is coming off a 40-goal, 44-assist season for almost 90 points, and he missed a few games. Let me just check this very quickly. But Jake Guentzel alongside Sidney Crosby, and I believe Bryan Rust played most of the minutes last year. That was a very effective line. And Sidney Crosby, as much as I am not willing to give it over fully that he is done, he is right there as one of the best players in the NHL still. And Jake Guentzel put up 40 goals and 44 assists in only 75 games last year. So I wanted to mention that. Do not forget about number 87. And don't forget about the Pittsburgh Penguins, who made some noise at the end of last season, and I think will still be a force to be reckoned with in a very good Metro division.
Yeah, they will be a force to be reckoned with, especially after re-signing and Chris Letang. They get the three guys there. They keep them for a very long time. They have Tristan Jarry back and healthy in the crease. Jake Guentzel and Bryan Rust. They dealt with a lot of issues last year. So, for them to make the playoffs, make a decent push at it, kudos to them. But yeah, whenever you're playing with Sidney Crosby, you got to make sure they're going to be a top fantasy guy for years to come.
Thank you for putting up the double thumbs up for those of you who aren't watching on YouTube. First of all, I don't know why you're not doing that. But number two, Steele is giving me double thumbs up. I think a lot of people tend to forget that Sidney Crosby is still such an elite force to be reckoned with in the NHL. And like you said, him being on a line with anybody makes that trio absolutely.
Look what he did last year for Evan Rodriguez. Like exactly that. And Rodriguez drops back down and he just doesn't produce anymore.
Also, can I just say, at 35, soon to be 36 years old, so 35 years old last year, Steele, Sid put up 31 goals, 53 assists in 69 games while logging almost 20 minutes of ice time a night. Please do not tell me this man is done yet, because he wants another cup. And I'm telling you, the Pittsburgh Penguins are a well-coached and well top-to-bottom organized franchise. Do not sleep on them. Tristan Jarry doesn't get the love he deserves. I expect the Pittsburgh Penguins to be right in the mix for the top 3 slots in the Metro next season, and lots of valuable fantasy targets in that lineup, especially on the top line. One of the best trios in the league, baby.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I am starting to come around now. Especially, I've always loved Sidney Crosby. I'm starting to like their goaltenders a little bit more with Tristan Jarry, especially since he's on my fantasy team. But I do like Jake Guentzel. I like Bryan Rust. I'm starting to come around for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Thank you.
I'm starting to like them a little bit more. But you should love the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Tuning in every single day, making it your first listen every single day. But for your second listen, you have to check out Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast, just like this one right here. So make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Like I mentioned, we just passed 170 subscribers. Let's get to 200 before the season starts. Hopefully 300 by the end of the year. And thank you again for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.